Some places carry the weight of history like a curse, and the old abandoned train was one of them. Known for its tragic past, the train had been the site of numerous accidents, each one claiming the lives of passengers whose souls never found peace. It was said that the train still echoed with the cries of the dead, and tonight, a team of paranormal investigators would learn just how true that was. Joseph, the leader of the team, had always been fascinated by the supernatural. His team had investigated countless haunted locations, but this train felt different. The air around it was thick with an oppressive energy, as if the very tracks were alive with the memories of those who had perished. As they boarded the train, a cold wind swept through the station, rattling the empty carriages. The team moved through the first few cars with their equipment, searching for signs of paranormal activity. At first, there was nothing but the creak of old wood and the distant sound of the wind. But as they ventured deeper into the heart of the train, the atmosphere grew heavier, more charged with something unseen. Joseph felt a chill run down his spine, the kind that told him they were not alone. The first sign came as a faint whisper, barely audible, over the sound of their footsteps. Joseph stopped, motioning for the others to listen. The whisper grew louder, a chorus of voices overlapping, filling the air with a sound that was both haunting and mournful. They were the voices of the lost, those who had died on these very tracks, trapped between this world and the next. As they continued, the whispers became clearer and more distinct. Names were spoken, words of regret, of sorrow, of anger. Joseph could feel the temperature drop around them, the cold seeping into his bones. He glanced at his team, and he could see the fear in their eyes. They all felt it, the presence of something that did not belong in the world of the living. Suddenly, one of the investigators cried out, pointing to a shadowy figure at the end of the car. It was an apparition, barely visible in the dim light, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. Joseph's heart pounded as he realized they were no longer in control of the situation. The spirits had taken notice of them, and they were not happy. The figure moved toward them, its face twisted in anguish. Joseph's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt rooted to the spot. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if the spirits were trying to communicate something important. But the words were lost in the chaos, drowned out by the overwhelming sense of dread that filled the air. As the apparition drew closer, the team began to panic. Equipment was dropped, and they scrambled to escape, but the train seemed to have a mind of its own. Doors that had been open now refused to budge, trapping them inside. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. Joseph knew they had to find a way out before it was too late. He led the team back the way they had come, but the train's layout had changed, twisting into a labyrinth of endless corridors. The whispers were now screams, filled with the pain and anger of souls who had been trapped for far too long. In the distance, they could see the faint outline of an exit, but between them and safety stood a crowd of ghostly figures. Their faces were gaunt, hollow, their eyes filled with a burning hatred. Joseph realized with horror that these were the spirits of those who had died in the train's tragic accidents. They had been waiting for someone to take their place. The team pushed forward, trying to reach the exit, but the spirits closed in around them, their cold hands reaching out to pull them back. Joseph felt the icy grip of death on his arm, and he knew they were running out of time. He shouted for the others to keep moving, to not look back, but it was too late. One by one, his team members were pulled into the darkness, their screams echoing through the train. Joseph could only watch in terror as the spirits claimed them, their bodies vanishing into the shadows. He was the last one left, and he could feel the spirits closing in on him, their whispers now a deafening roar. In a final act of desperation, Joseph lunged for the exit, his hand just inches from the door. But as he reached it, the door slammed shut and the train began to move. He turned to face the spirits, knowing that he was now a part of the haunted train's tragic history. The last thing he saw was the twisted, vengeful faces of the dead, their hollow eyes staring into his soul as the darkness consumed him. The train continued on its endless journey, carrying the souls of the damned through the night. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of whispers could still be heard, echoing through the empty cars as the spirits of the dead claimed yet another victim. They say there's a train that vanished without a trace decades ago, carrying hundreds of passengers to an unknown fate. Every year, on the anniversary of its disappearance, the ghost train is said to reappear, offering a one-way ticket to the afterlife. Most people dismiss the story as a local legend, a tale meant to scare off curious minds. But Andrew and his friends were different. They were thrill seekers, eager to experience the supernatural firsthand. On the night of the anniversary, they made their way to the old, abandoned train station where the ghost train was rumored to appear. The station was a relic from a bygone era, its crumbling walls and broken windows bathed in the pale light of the full moon. The air was thick with anticipation as they waited, their laughter and bravado masking the underlying tension. As midnight approached, the station fell eerily silent. The wind died down, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the distance, they heard it, the low, mournful whistle of a train. Andrew's heart raced as he saw the ghostly outline of a train emerging from the darkness, its headlights piercing the night like eyes of a predator. The train pulled into the station with a screeching halt, its doors sliding open with a soft hiss. The interior was dimly lit, the seats covered in a thick layer of dust. But despite its abandoned appearance, the train seemed alive, as if it had been waiting for them. Without a word, Andrew and his friends boarded, their footsteps echoing eerily in the empty carriages. As soon as they settled into their seats, the doors closed and the train jolted to life. The station outside blurred as the train picked up speed, hurtling into the night with a speed that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The thrill seekers exchanged nervous glances, the reality of their situation beginning to sink in. They were on the ghost train, and there was no turning back. At first, the ride was uneventful, the train gliding smoothly along the tracks. But then the temperature began to drop, the air inside the carriage growing colder with each passing second. Andrew could see his breath misting in front of him, and a sense of unease settled over the group. The lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. Then they heard it, a soft, whispering sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The whispers grew louder, filling the air with a chorus of voices, each one speaking in a language they couldn't understand. Andrew felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the voices were coming from the other passengers. The seats that had been empty moments ago were now occupied by shadowy figures, their faces hidden in the darkness. The thrill seekers watched in horror as the figures turned to face them, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Andrew's heart pounded as he realized these were the spirits of the passengers who had disappeared all those years ago. They were trapped on the train, doomed to repeat the journey over and over again. The whispers grew more frantic, the voices overlapping in a cacophony of despair. The shadowy figures began to move, their ghostly forms flickering as they reached out towards the living passengers. Andrew's breath hitched in his throat as he felt a cold hand brush against his arm. He jumped to his feet, but the train's motion made it impossible to keep his balance. The train hurtled forward at an impossible speed, the world outside the windows a blur of darkness and light. Andrew and his friends tried to find a way off the train, but the doors were sealed shut, the windows unbreakable. They were trapped, just like the spirits who had come before them. As the train continued its relentless journey, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. The lights flickered out, plunging the carriage into darkness. The only illumination came from the glowing eyes of the spirits, their faces twisted in expressions of agony and rage. Andrew could feel the walls closing in, the air growing thicker with each passing moment. In a final act of desperation, Andrew made his way to the front of the train, hoping to find the conductor and stop the nightmare. But when he reached the control room, he found it empty, the controls moving on their own as if guided by an invisible hand. The train was running on its own, a machine with no master, guided by the spirits of the damned. The whispers reached a fever pitch, the voices filling Andrew's mind with their anguish. He knew now that there was no escape. The train was on a one-way journey, its destination the same as it had been decades ago, into the abyss. He felt the pull of the spirits, their cold hands dragging him down into the darkness. As the train plunged into the void, Andrew's last thought was of the legend, of how the ghost train reappeared every year to claim more souls. He had thought it was just a story, a thrill to be chased. But now he knew the truth. The ghost train was real, and its passengers were doomed to ride it for all eternity. When the train finally stopped, there was no one left on board. The doors slid open, revealing an empty station bathed in the pale light of dawn. The ghost train had completed its journey, leaving nothing behind but the echoes of its last ride and the souls it had claimed. Have you ever felt true fear, the kind that grips you so tightly it leaves you paralyzed? This story is about a train ride that turned into a nightmare for everyone on board. It was an ordinary evening when the train set off on its usual route through the countryside. The passengers were relaxed, some dozing off, others lost in their thoughts. The journey was smooth, uneventful, until the train approached the tunnel. This tunnel was known for being particularly long, cutting through a mountain range. But no one could have anticipated the horror that awaited them inside. As the train entered the tunnel, the lights flickered and then, without warning, went out completely. The darkness was absolute, swallowing every trace of light. Panic rippled through the train as passengers fumbled for their phones, trying to illuminate the pitch-black surroundings. But even the faint glow of screens seemed to be consumed by the oppressive blackness. Suddenly, a low, growling sound echoed through the train. It was distant at first, but it grew louder, closer, as if something was moving through the darkness. The passengers fell silent, their fear palpable, as the growl turned into a chilling, inhuman howl. No one could see what was coming, but they could feel it, a presence, malevolent and hungry, stalking them in the dark. Then came the first scream. It was a blood-curdling cry from the front of the train, followed by a sickening thud. Panic erupted. People scrambled from their seats, pushing and shoving, desperate to get away from whatever was hunting them. But in the chaos, they only succeeded in disorienting themselves further, unable to tell which direction led to safety. The growling grew louder, more guttural, as the unseen force began to move through the train. It moved quickly, with a purpose, picking off passengers one by one. Each scream was cut short, replaced by a chilling silence that was somehow even more terrifying. The train was now a hunting ground, and the passengers were prey. In the midst of the chaos, a small group of passengers, led by a man named Daniel, decided that their only chance of survival was to reach the end of the tunnel before the train did. They believed that whatever was hunting them was bound to the darkness, and if they could just make it to the light, they might escape. They began to move, feeling their way through the dark, the sounds of terror echoing all around them. With each step, the tension grew, the sense of being watched, of being followed, becoming almost unbearable. The growling was close now, too close, and Daniel knew they were running out of time. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and the group felt a presence right behind them. They could hear its breath, feel the icy chill of its approach. One of the group, a woman named Sarah, stumbled and fell, and in the darkness, she was dragged away before anyone could react. Her screams echoed through the tunnel, sending a fresh wave of panic through the survivors. Daniel urged the remaining passengers to move faster, but the darkness seemed to stretch on forever. The tunnel was a labyrinth, twisting and turning, and it was impossible to tell if they were making progress or simply running in circles. The growling was all around them now, echoing off the walls, growing louder with every passing second. Finally, they saw it, a faint glimmer of light at the far end of the tunnel. It was a small, distant hope, but it was enough to drive them forward. They ran, their breaths coming in ragged gasps, the growling right on their heels. But as they neared the light, they realized with horror that the tunnel was narrowing, the walls closing in. Daniel was the first to reach the light, but just as he thought they were safe, he felt a cold hand grip his ankle. He looked back, and for the first time he saw it. The creature was a twisted, shadowy form, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was a demon of the dark, bound to the shadows, and it was not going to let them escape. With a surge of adrenaline, Daniel kicked free and lunged toward the light. The others followed, but the creature was relentless, dragging some back into the darkness. Daniel felt the light on his face, felt the warmth, but he knew they were not all going to make it. In the end, only a handful of passengers emerged from the tunnel, gasping for breath as they stumbled into the daylight. The train burst out of the tunnel moments later, the screeching of its wheels a haunting reminder of the terror they had just escaped. But as the survivors looked back at the tunnel, they knew the horror was not over. The train had made it through, but the darkness had claimed its victims. The tunnel stood there, a silent, gaping mouth, waiting for its next meal. And as the survivors boarded the train, they could still hear the faint growl of the creature echoing through the walls, a reminder that the terror of the tunnel was far from over. There's a tale whispered among travelers, a story of a luxury train that promises comfort but delivers only terror. The Nightmare Express, they call it. It's said that those who board this train never return the same. For some, the journey ends in madness. For others, it's something far worse. On a cold, moonless night, a group of unsuspecting passengers settled into their plush seats, unaware of the horror that awaited them. The train had an air of old-world charm, with its velvet upholstery, crystal chandeliers, and soft, ambient music playing in the background. It felt like a journey back in time, a step into an era of elegance and luxury. But as the train pulled away from the station, a sense of unease began to creep into the minds of the passengers. It started subtly, with strange flickers in the windows, as if shadows were moving just beyond the glass. Some passengers brushed it off as a trick of the light, Others felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. And then, as the train barreled into the night, the nightmare began. Without warning, the lights dimmed, casting long, distorted shadows across the carriage. The passengers felt an inexplicable dread, as if they were being watched. A man named Andrew, who had taken the journey for the thrill of luxury, suddenly found himself gripped by an overwhelming sense of fear. He glanced around, noticing the strained expressions on the faces of those around him. As the train sped on, the line between reality and nightmare began to blur. Passengers were plagued by visions, horrifying scenes that seemed to come to life before their eyes. Andrew watched in terror as a woman across from him stared into her compact mirror, only to see her reflection twist into a monstrous grin. She dropped the mirror with a gasp, but the grin remained, etched into her mind like a scar. Each passing hour brought new horrors. A businessman sitting by the window began to see faces in the glass, ghostly figures staring back at him with hollow eyes. He tried to look away, but the faces followed him, pressing against the glass as if trying to break through. The air grew thick with fear, and the once luxurious train became a moving prison, its walls closing in on the terrified passengers. Andrew felt the world around him shift, the soft music now a distorted wail. The train itself seemed to be alive, feeding off their fear, pushing them closer to the brink of insanity. Desperate to escape, he rushed down the aisle, but every door he tried was locked. The windows showed only darkness, an endless void that offered no hope of escape. In one of the carriages, a child's toy began to move on its own, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The child's parents tried to calm their son, but the toy's movements grew more violent, its tiny limbs jerking in unnatural ways. The child screamed, and suddenly the toy exploded into a cloud of ash, leaving behind nothing but a faint echoing laughter. As the train continued its journey into the unknown, the passengers' nightmares became increasingly real. A man in a tailored suit began to claw at his face, convinced that something was crawling under his skin. Blood dripped down his cheeks as he tore at his flesh, his screams filling the carriage. The other passengers could only watch in horror, unable to help, trapped in their own personal hells. Andrew knew he had to find a way out before the train reached its final destination. But with every step he took, the train seemed to shift and change, leading him deeper into a labyrinth of horror. The walls seemed to breathe, the floor pulsing like a living organism. He could hear the whispers of the damned, their voices filling his mind with dark thoughts, pushing him closer to the edge. Finally, the train began to slow, the screech of the brakes sending shivers down Andrew's spine. The passengers, now mere shadows of their former selves, clung to the hope that the nightmare was finally over. But as the train came to a halt, they realized with growing dread that this was no ordinary station. It was a place that existed beyond the realm of the living, a portal to something far more sinister. The doors opened, and a thick, unnatural fog rolled in, swallowing the train and its passengers. Andrew tried to resist, but the fog was relentless, pulling him into its depths. As he was engulfed by the darkness, he heard the train's whistle, a haunting sound that echoed through the void. The Nightmare Express had reached its final stop. And for those on board, there was no coming back.